Sometimes the most broken people find each other in the darkest moments, and sometimes that's exactly when miracles happen. When Marcus Thompson, a single father barely keeping his head above water, makes a split-second decision to help a terrified girl he finds hiding behind a dumpster, he has no idea that this moment will change both their lives forever. She's running from monsters he can't imagine, and he's fighting battles of his own. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But sometimes the people who need saving the most are the ones who end up doing the rescuing. This is a story about courage in the face of impossible odds, about family being more than blood, and about how love can bloom in the most unlikely places. The rain hammered against the windshield of Marcus Thompson's beat-up Honda Civic as he pulled into the loading dock behind Romano's Pizza at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. The wipers groaned with each swipe, a sound that matched exactly how he felt after pulling a double shift that started at 6 in the morning. His back ached from lifting boxes all day at the warehouse, his second job, and now he was about to start his third shift of the week, delivering pizzas until 2 in the morning. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with rent due in 3 days and his 7-year-old son Jake needing new shoes for school. Marcus turned off the engine and sat for a moment in the sudden quiet, watching the rain streak down the windows. The dashboard clock glowed green in the darkness, reminding him that time was money he didn't have. Every minute he spent sitting here was a delivery he wasn't making, a tip he wasn't earning. But sometimes a man needed just a few seconds to breathe, to remind himself why he was grinding himself into dust day after day. Jake's face flashed in his mind, gap-toothed grin and wild brown hair that never wanted to stay combed. His boy deserved better than the cramped one-bedroom apartment they shared, better than generic cereal for breakfast and peanut butter sandwiches for lunch. Jake deserved a father who wasn't always exhausted, always stressed, always calculating whether they could afford the electricity bill this month. But Marcus was doing the best he could with what he had, and some days that had to be enough. The back door of Romano's was propped open despite the rain, yellow light spilling out into the alley along with the smell of garlic and melted cheese. Marcus pulled his jacket hood up and made a run for it, splashing through puddles that soaked through his worn sneakers. His feet had been wet for the better part of 3 months now, ever since the sole on his left shoe had started separating. New shoes were on the list right after rent and groceries and Jake's school supplies. Inside, the kitchen was chaos as usual. Steam rose from industrial ovens while Tony Romano shouted orders in rapid-fire Italian mixed with English. Delivery. Drivers grabbed insulated bags and headed back out into the storm, and Marcus quickly joined the rotation. His first delivery was to an apartment complex on the other side of town, a 20-minute drive in good weather. Tonight, with the rain turning every street into a river, it would take longer. The apartment building was one of those sprawling complexes built in the 70s, all beige siding and rusted railings. Marcus had delivered here before, usually late at night to college students who tipped in loose change, or not at all. But the order was for $43, which meant a decent tip if he was lucky. He grabbed the warming bags and trudged up the stairs to apartment 2B, rain dripping from his hood onto the pizza boxes. The man who answered the door was younger than Marcus expected, maybe early 20s, with nervous eyes and hands that shook slightly as he counted out exact change. No tip. Marcus forced a smile and thanked him anyway, because burning bridges never helped anyone. As he turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of movement behind the man, someone stepping quickly out of sight. The apartment was too quiet for a Tuesday night, and something felt off. But Marcus had learned to mind his own business. People's lives were complicated enough without him adding to the drama. He was halfway down the stairs when he heard it, a sound that made him freeze with one foot on the next step. It was crying, muffled and desperate, the kind that came from someone trying hard not to be heard. Marcus hesitated, his hand on the railing. The smart thing to do was keep walking, get back to his car, and pick up the next delivery. He had his own problems, his own son to worry about. But the crying continued, and Marcus found himself thinking about Jake, about how small and scared his boy had been after Sarah left them 2 years ago, how Jake had tried to muffle his own sobs into his pillow night after night, thinking his father couldn't hear. The memory hit Marcus like a physical blow, and before he could talk himself out of it, he was climbing back up the stairs. The crying was coming from somewhere near the dumpster area behind the building. Marcus followed the sound, his sneakers squelching in the muddy alley. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, but the darkness was thick as velvet. He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping the beam across overflowing trash bins and scattered debris. That's when he saw her. She was huddled behind the largest dumpster, knees pulled up to her chest, dark hair plastered to her head by the rain. She couldn't have been more than 12 or 13, wearing clothes that were too big and too thin for the weather. When the light hit her face, she looked up with eyes so wide and terrified that Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. For a moment, neither of them moved. The girl stared at him like a cornered animal, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Marcus slowly lowered his phone, keeping his movements careful and non-threatening. He had seen that look before, in the mirror, in Jake's eyes during those first awful months after the divorce. It was the look of someone who had learned that the world was full of people who would hurt you if you gave them the chance. The girl was shivering violently, her lips tinged blue in the dim light. She wore a thin pink sweatshirt that might have been bright once, but was now faded and stained, and jeans that were rolled up at the cuffs because they were too long. Her feet were bare, dirty, and she clutched something small and white in her hand that Marcus couldn't quite make out. Marcus crouched down slowly, the way he did when Jake had nightmares and needed coaxing out from under the bed. He kept his distance, his voice gentle and low. The rain pattered on the metal dumpster above them, creating an odd sort of privacy in the middle of the city. She didn't answer, just watched him with those enormous dark eyes. Marcus could see now that she was Latina, probably around Jake's age, though it was hard to tell. Fear had a way of making children look both older and younger than their years. Her breathing was quick and shallow, and Marcus realized she was in some kind of shock. Marcus glanced around the alley, looking for any sign of parents or guardians, anyone who might be looking for a lost child. But the only sounds were distant traffic and the steady drip of water from the fire escape above. Wherever this girl had come from, she was completely alone. The smart thing would be to call the police, let the professionals handle whatever this was. But Marcus had had his own dealings with social services and police officers who meant well, but didn't understand what it was like to have nowhere safe to go. Sometimes the system failed people, especially people who didn't speak perfect English or didn't know how to navigate bureaucracy. Sometimes the system failed children most of all. Marcus pulled off his jacket, ignoring the immediate chill as rain soaked through his t-shirt. He held it out toward the girl, keeping his movements slow and obvious. She flinched when he moved, but didn't run. That was something, at least. The jacket was old and worn, nothing special, but it was dry and warm from his body heat. The girl stared at it for a long moment, then slowly reached out and took it. Her fingers brushed his briefly, ice-cold and trembling. She pulled the jacket around her shoulders, and Marcus was struck by how small she looked inside it, how young and vulnerable. Marcus sat back on his heels, giving her space while staying close enough to shield her from the worst of the rain. With his body, his phone buzzed in his pocket, probably Tony wondering where he was, but he ignored it. Some things were more important than pizza delivery schedules. The girl was looking at him differently now, still wary, but with something like hope creeping into her expression. Marcus had always been good with scared kids. It was a skill he'd developed out of necessity when Jake's world had fallen apart. But it seemed to translate to other children as well. Maybe it was because he understood what it felt like to be powerless, to be at the mercy of forces bigger than yourself. Marcus nodded toward the apartment building. The lights were still, on in 2B, and he could see shadows moving behind the curtains. Whatever was happening up there, it wasn't good. The girl's eyes followed his gaze, and her whole body tensed like she was ready to run. The girl shook her head violently, her grip tightening on his jacket. Her eyes were wide with terror again, and Marcus realized that whatever she was running from, it was in that apartment. The pieces were starting to come together in his mind, forming a picture that made his stomach turn. Young girl, scared and alone, hiding in an alley behind an apartment where nervous men counted out exact change and tried to keep visitors from seeing inside. Marcus had heard about these things on the news, read about them in newspapers that people left behind at the warehouse. Human trafficking, they called it, though the clinical term didn't capture the horror of what it really meant. Children bought and sold like merchandise, trapped in situations they couldn't escape from, too young and too scared to ask for help. Marcus felt a cold rage building in his chest, the kind that had nothing to do with the rain soaking through. His clothes. Someone had hurt this child, was probably still hurting children like her, and they were doing it right here in his city while he delivered pizzas and worried about rent money. The injustice of it was staggering. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But anger wouldn't help the girl shivering in front of him. She needed practical help, immediate action, someone who would protect her instead of using her. Marcus made a decision that surprised him with its clarity. He wasn't going to call the police, not yet. He was going to get this child somewhere safe first, somewhere warm and dry, where she could tell her story to people who would listen. Marcus stood up slowly, water dripping from his hair and clothes. He gestured toward his car, visible at the mouth of the alley. The girl looked where he pointed, then back at his face, trying to read his intentions. Marcus understood her hesitation. She had probably learned the hard way that adults couldn't be trusted, that people who seemed helpful often had their own agendas. The girl clutched the small white object in her hand tighter, and Marcus realized it was a photograph. Edges worn, soft from handling. A family picture, maybe, or a friend from before whatever nightmare had brought her to this alley. Everyone needed something to hold on to, some reminder that the world contained more than just cruelty and fear. Marcus pulled out his phone again, but this time he showed her the screen instead of using the flashlight. His wallpaper was a picture of Jake from last month, grinning at the camera with chocolate ice cream smeared across his cheek. The girl studied the photo, her expression softening slightly. Children recognized other children, even in pictures. The girl nodded just barely, but it was enough. She struggled to her feet, wincing as weight settled on her bare soles. Marcus started to reach out to help her, then stopped himself. She needed to feel like she had some control over what happened next, some choice in her own rescue. They walked toward his car together, the girl staying close to the buildings where the shadows were deepest. Marcus kept his pace slow, and his movements predictable, the way you might approach a wounded animal. Every few steps, she glanced back at the apartment building, making sure they weren't being followed. Marcus's Honda was parked under a broken streetlight, which now seemed like a blessing instead of just another example of the neighborhood's decay. He unlocked the passenger door and opened it, then stepped back to give the girl space to decide. For herself, the interior light came on, illuminating worn seats and a dashboard covered in delivery receipts, but it was clean and it was safe. The girl looked into the car, then at Marcus's face, still making her calculations. Trust was something that had to be earned, especially from someone who had learned that most adults were dangerous. Marcus waited, rain dripping down his back, while she made up her mind. Finally, she climbed into the passenger seat, moving gingerly, like someone who was injured or just exhausted beyond measure. Marcus closed the door gently and walked around to the driver's side. When he got in, he immediately turned the heat up to full blast and adjusted the vents so warm air flowed toward her. The girl pulled his jacket tighter around herself and leaned toward the heating vent like a flower turning toward sunlight. Her hair was starting to dry in dark waves around her face, and Marcus could see that she was pretty in the way children were pretty, with large eyes and delicate features that would probably be striking when she was older. If she lived long, enough to get older. Marcus turned on the radio, keeping the volume low. Sometimes silence was more frightening than noise, especially for someone who had spent too much time alone with their own thoughts. A soft jazz station came through the speakers, saxophone and piano, that filled the car with something warmer than just heated air. The girl was looking around the interior of the car, taking in the stack of pizza delivery receipts. The child's booster seat in the back that Jake had recently outgrown. The crayon drawing taped to the dashboard that showed two stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. Normal family things. The kind of ordinary details that spoke of a life where children were safe and loved. Marcus realized he needed to call Tony, let him know there was an emergency and he wouldn't be finishing his deliveries tonight. But first, he needed to get this girl somewhere secure, somewhere she could warm up and maybe eat something. His apartment was small and humble, but it was the safest place he knew. The drive to his apartment complex took 15 minutes through empty streets. The girl stayed quiet the whole time, occasionally glancing at Marcus, but mostly staring out the window at the passing lights. She was holding that photograph against her chest now, whatever image it contained, clearly precious to her. Marcus lived in a complex that was nicer than where he'd found her, but not by much. Working-class families mostly, people who were doing their best with limited resources. The kind of place where neighbors looked out for each other's kids and nobody asked too many questions about why someone might need help. It wasn't perfect, but it was home. He parked in his assigned spot and turned off the engine. The sudden quiet felt heavy after the sound of rain and windshield wipers. The girl was looking up at the building, probably wondering what kind of place this was, whether she was walking into another trap. Marcus pulled his keyring out of his pocket and showed her the apartment key, then pointed up at the third floor where a light glowed in one window. Jake was staying at his grandmother's house tonight, like he did every Tuesday when Marcus worked late deliveries. The timing felt like providence, giving him space to figure out how to help this girl without immediately overwhelming her with more strangers. They climbed the stairs together, the girl's bare feet silent on the concrete steps. Marcus's apartment was at the end of the hallway, 3E, with a welcome mat that Jake had picked out himself. It said, "Home Sweet Home" in faded letters, and there was a basketball sticker on the door from when Jake had gone through his sports phase last year. Marcus unlocked the door and stepped inside first, turning on lights and making sure everything was welcoming rather than intimidating. The apartment was small but clean, one bedroom that he and Jake shared, a living room with a couch that folded out into a bed, and a kitchen barely big enough for two people. But it was theirs, and it was safe, and right now, that was what mattered. The girl stepped inside tentatively, still wrapped in his jacket. She looked around the living room, taking in the mismatched furniture, the toy cars scattered on the coffee table, the school artwork stuck to the refrigerator with magnets. Itchu was clearly a place where a child lived, where someone cared enough to make a home out of very little. Marcus went to the linen closet and pulled out clean towels, then started a pot of coffee brewing in the kitchen. The girl watched his movements carefully, ready to bolt if he did anything threatening. But Marcus had experience with scared children. And he knew that routine actions, normal domestic tasks, could be incredibly reassuring to someone who had forgotten what normal looked like. The smell of coffee began to fill the apartment, mixing with the lingering scent of the chicken nuggets he'd heated up for Jake's dinner before leaving for work. Ordinary smells, the kind that meant safety and routine, and people who cared enough to make sure you were fed and warm. Marcus held up a towel and pointed toward the bathroom, indicating that she could clean up if she wanted to. The girl nodded and took the towel, disappearing into the small bathroom and closing the door softly behind her. Marcus heard the water running and allowed himself to breathe deeply for the first time since he'd found her in that alley. He was in way over his head, he knew that. This wasn't something you could solve with good intentions and a warm apartment. The girl needed medical attention, legal help, professional counseling, probably a dozen other things he couldn't provide. But she also needed someone to care about what happened to her, someone who would fight for her instead of just processing her through the system. Marcus had never thought of himself as particularly brave or heroic. He was just a guy trying to keep his head above water, working multiple jobs to support his son, and hoping that someday things might get a little easier. But sometimes ordinary people were called to do extraordinary things, and sometimes the most important moments in your life happened when you weren't looking for them. The bathroom door opened and the girl emerged, her face clean and her hair combed back with wet fingers. She had folded the towel neatly and held it out to him, a small gesture that spoke of politeness drummed into her from early childhood. Someone had taught her manners once, had cared enough to show her how to be considerate of other people's things. Marcus took the towel and pointed to the couch, indicating that she should sit wherever she was comfortable. She chose the corner closest to the front door, keeping her escape route clear. But she was relaxing slightly. The apartment was warm and quiet and non-threatening, exactly what she needed after whatever hell she had been living through. Marcus poured coffee for himself and heated milk in the microwave for her, adding sugar and a touch of vanilla to make it taste less medicinal. When he handed her the mug, she wrapped both hands around it like it was precious, breathing in the sweet steam. Her hands had stopped shaking, which was progress. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the girl sipping her warm milk while Marcus tried to figure out what to do next. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, but he could hear water still dripping from the gutters. The clock on the wall showed nearly 1 in the morning, and somewhere across town, Tony was probably furious about his missing delivery driver. But Marcus found that he didn't care about Tony's anger or missed deliveries or any of the dozen small crises that usually occupied his mind. All of that seemed insignificant compared to the child sitting on his couch, slowly warming up and beginning to look less like a terrified animal. The girl finished her milk and set the mug down carefully on the coffee table. She looked at Marcus for a long moment, seeming to weigh her words, then spoke for the first time since he'd found her. Her voice was small and hoarse, accented with something that might have been Spanish or maybe Portuguese. But the word she spoke was clear enough, and it hit Marcus like a punch to the chest. She said it again, slightly louder, and Marcus realized she was asking him for help. Not just immediate help, not just a warm place to sit for an hour, but real help. The kind that would change both their lives forever. Marcus looked into her dark eyes and saw himself reflected there. Saw Jake's face when he woke up from nightmares about his mother leaving. He saw every child who had ever been failed by the adults who were supposed to protect them. Every kid who had learned too young that the world was a dangerous place. And in that moment, sitting in his small apartment at 1 in the morning with rain still dripping outside, Marcus Thompson made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He was going to help this girl, really help her, whatever that meant and however long it took. He had no idea what he was getting into, no idea how much his life was about to change. He didn't know about the months of legal battles ahead, the social workers and court hearings and background checks. He didn't know about the nightmares she would have, or the gradual, heartbreaking process of learning to trust again. He didn't know that she would change him as much as he changed her, that saving her would somehow save him too. All he knew was that she needed help, and he was in a position to give it. Sometimes that was all the information a person needed to make the right choice. Marcus nodded at her, meeting her eyes directly so she would know he meant it. Then he pulled out his phone and started making the calls that would transform them both from strangers in the night into something like a family. The first call was to Tony, to quit his delivery job effective immediately. The second was to his mother, to ask if Jake could stay an extra night because something important had come up. The third was to a lawyer he'd heard about who specialized in immigration and child welfare cases, leaving a message on an answering machine at nearly 2 a.m. Each call was a step away from his old life and towards something completely unknown. But as he talked, the girl watched him with growing hope in her eyes, and Marcus knew he was doing the right thing. By the time he finished his calls, dawn was starting to creep through the windows, painting the apartment in soft grey light. The girl had curled up in the corner of the couch, finally allowing herself to sleep in a place that felt safe. Marcus found a blanket and covered her gently, then settled into the chair across from her to keep watch. As he sat there listening to her breathe, Marcus thought about Jake, about the conversation they would need to have when his son came home. Jake had been asking for a little sister for months, not understanding why that wasn't something his father could just arrange. Now, in the strangest possible way, maybe Jake would get his wish. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain and probably difficult, but full of possibilities that hadn't existed 12 hours ago. Marcus Thompson, struggling single father and part-time pizza delivery driver, had become something he never expected to be. A rescuer, a protector, maybe even a father to someone who desperately needed one. And as the sun rose over the city, warming the windows of his small apartment, Marcus allowed himself to believe that sometimes miracles really did happen in the darkest moments. Sometimes the people who needed saving the most were the ones who ended up doing the rescuing. The girl slept peacefully for the first time in months, safe in the knowledge that someone had chosen to fight for her. And Marcus watched over her, already planning how to give her the life she deserved, the childhood that had been stolen from her, the family that would never let her go. It was the beginning of everything. The morning sunlight filtering through the blinds woke Marcus before his alarm had a chance to sound. For a moment he forgot where he was, why his neck ached from sleeping in the chair, why his apartment felt different somehow. Then he saw the small figure curled up on his couch, dark hair spilled across the cushions, and everything came rushing back. The girl was still there, still real, still his responsibility. She was awake too, watching him with those enormous dark eyes that seemed to hold far too much knowledge for someone so young. In the daylight, he could see details that the alley's darkness had hidden. There was a thin scar running from her, left temple to her jawline, barely visible but unmistakably there. Her wrists bore faint marks that looked suspiciously like rope burns, mostly healed but still tender-looking. Someone had hurt this child, repeatedly and systematically, and the evidence was written across her skin like a map of suffering. Marcus sat up slowly, working the kinks out of his neck, while trying not to make any sudden movements that might startle her. The apartment felt smaller in daylight, more obviously the home of a man barely scraping by. The furniture was second-hand, the carpet worn thin in places, and Jake's toys were scattered everywhere, despite Marcus's attempts to keep things organized. But it was clean, and it was safe, and for now, that would have to be enough. The girl, had folded the blanket he'd covered her with into a neat square, another small sign of the manners someone had taught her before her world fell apart. She was sitting upright now, alert and ready to move quickly if needed. Trust would come slowly, Marcus realized, earned in tiny increments through consistency and patience. Marcus gestured toward the bathroom, then pantomimed brushing his teeth. Basic needs first, then they could tackle the bigger questions. The girl nodded and padded silently across the apartment, moving like someone who had learned to make herself invisible. The bathroom door closed with barely a whisper. While she was occupied, Marcus called his mother. Helen Thompson had raised 4 boys largely on her own after his father died young, and she understood better than most what it meant to take on more than you could handle, because it was the right thing to do. The phone rang 3 times before her familiar voice answered, already alert despite the early hour. Marcus explained the situation as briefly as possible, knowing his mother would ask questions later, but trusting her to understand the urgency now. There was a pause when he finished, the kind of silence that came when someone was processing information that would change everything. Then Helen spoke, her voice steady and sure. She would keep Jake for the rest of the week, maybe longer if needed. She would make calls to people she knew in social services, the good ones who still remembered why they'd gotten into the business of helping children. She would research lawyers and advocacy groups and emergency funding sources. Most importantly, she would support whatever decision Marcus made, because she had raised him to know the difference between right and wrong, and she trusted his judgment even when he didn't trust it himself. The girl emerged from the bathroom, looking slightly more human, but still fragile as spun glass. Marcus had been rummaging through Jake's outgrown clothes while she was gone, and now he held up a pair of small sneakers and some clean socks. Her feet were roughly Jake's size from last year, and while the shoes would be too big, they would be infinitely better than going barefoot. She accepted the shoes with a small nod of thanks, sitting on the edge of the couch to put them on. The socks were thick and warm, and Marcus watched her wiggle her toes inside them with something that might have been pleasure. Such small comforts, things most children took completely for granted, and yet they seemed to mean everything to someone who had been denied even basic human dignity. Marcus made breakfast while she explored the apartment with careful, quiet steps. Nothing elaborate, just scrambled eggs and toast with strawberry jam, but he cooked enough for 3 people because he had no idea when she had last eaten a real meal. The smell of food seemed to draw her back to the kitchen, where she hovered near the doorway like she was afraid to presume she was invited. Marcus set 2 plates on the small table and pulled out a chair for her, the same chair Jake always sat in when they ate together. The girl approached cautiously, sliding into the seat and staring down at the plate of food like she couldn't quite believe it was meant for her. When Marcus sat down across from her and began eating, she finally picked up her fork and took a tentative bite. She ate like someone who had learned never to waste food, cleaning her plate methodically and completely. Marcus refilled it twice before she finally seemed satisfied, color returning to her cheeks as her body remembered what it felt like to be properly nourished. Throughout the meal, she kept glancing toward the door, toward the windows, checking escape routes even in this moment of safety. After breakfast, Marcus tried to coax her into talking. He spoke slowly and clearly, mixing English with the few Spanish phrases he remembered from high school. Her name was Sophia, she finally whispered, and she was 11 years old, though she looked both older and younger, depending on the angle of the light. She had been in the United States for 8 months, brought here by people who promised her family she would go to school and send money home. The story came out in fragments, pieces of a nightmare told in a voice so small Marcus had to lean forward to hear her. Sophia's family lived in a village in Guatemala where there was no work, no money, no future for a girl with dreams of becoming a teacher. When the recruiters came with their smooth words and false promises, her parents had believed them. They thought they were giving their daughter a chance at a better life. Instead, Sophia had been sold into a hell that Marcus could barely comprehend. Moved from city to city, never staying anywhere long enough to learn the streets or make connections. Locked in rooms during the day, forced to work at night, beaten if she cried or tried to resist. She had escaped twice before, only to be dragged back and punished so severely that she had stopped believing freedom was possible. But Tuesday night had been different. The men had been drinking, celebrating some business success that meant nothing to Sophia except that they were distracted and careless. When one of them passed out and forgot to lock the door, she had seen her chance and taken it. She had run blindly through the rain until she couldn't run anymore, then hidden behind the dumpster and prayed to the Virgin Mary that someone kind would find her before the monsters did. Marcus listened, without interrupting, his hands clenched into fists under the table as rage built inside him like a bonfire. He had heard about human trafficking in abstract terms, statistics on the news or articles in magazines. But seeing it embodied in this tiny girl with her careful manners and haunted eyes made it real in a way that left him shaking with fury. When Sophia finished speaking, silence stretched between them, heavy as lead. Marcus wanted to promise her that the men who had hurt her would pay, that justice would find them and make them suffer as they had made her suffer. But he was a working-class single father with no connections and limited resources, not some vigilante hero from a movie. The most he could do was keep Sophia safe and try to build her a life worth living. The phone rang, startling them both. It was Marcus's mother calling back with information. She had spoken to Maria Santos, a social worker she knew from church, who specialized in trafficking cases. Maria would come by that afternoon to assess the situation, not as an official visit, but as a friend helping a friend. She would know what steps needed to be taken, what resources were available, how to navigate the system without putting Sophia at further risk. Marcus also needed to take Sophia to a doctor, someone who could document her injuries and check for health problems that might need immediate attention. Helen had found a clinic that worked with vulnerable populations, where the staff understood the delicate nature of trauma and the need for confidentiality. The appointment was set for later that morning. After he hung up, Marcus explained to Sophia what would happen next. He spoke carefully, making sure she understood that these were people who wanted to help her, not hurt her. He promised that he would stay with her through every appointment, every interview, every step of the process. She wouldn't have to face any of it alone. Sophia nodded, but Marcus could see the fear creeping back into her eyes. She had learned not to trust authority figures, not to believe in systems that claimed to protect children. Her experience had taught her that adults lied, that promises were broken, that the people who were supposed to help often did the opposite. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her the picture of Jake again, the same grinning face that had helped convince her to get in his car the night before. He told her about his son, about how Jake had been scared and angry after his mother left, how it had taken time and patience and consistency to help him believe that some people could be trusted not to leave. He told Sophia about his own childhood, about growing up poor but loved, about his mother working 2 jobs to keep food on the table and still finding time to help him with homework. He talked about his father, who had died when Marcus was only 14, and how that loss had taught him that life was unpredictable, but love was real. He shared pieces of himself, hoping she would understand that she wasn't alone anymore. The clinic visit was as gentle as such things could be, but still difficult. Dr. Patricia Reeves was a soft-spoken woman in her 50s who had been working with trauma victims for most of her career. She examined Sophia with infinite patience, explaining each step before she did it, never touching without permission. The physical evidence of abuse was documented with clinical precision, photographs and measurements that would become part of a legal case if Sophia ever felt strong enough to testify. Sophia was malnourished, but not dangerously so, and most of her injuries were healing well. There were some health concerns that would need monitoring, but nothing that couldn't be addressed with proper care and nutrition. Dr. Reeves prescribed vitamins and a high-calorie diet and gave Marcus her personal phone number in case Sophia needed anything before their next appointment. On the drive home, Sophia was quiet again, processing everything that had happened. Marcus stopped at a Target and bought her some clothes that actually fit, basic items like underwear and pajamas and a warm jacket. He let her pick out a stuffed animal from the toy section, and after much deliberation, she chose a small brown bear with gentle eyes and a red ribbon around its neck. Back at the apartment, Sophia clutched the bear while Marcus made phone calls to his various employers. He quit the warehouse job and the pizza delivery, burning bridges he might need later, but knowing that some things were more important than financial security. He kept only his weekend job doing maintenance at a local elementary school, work that paid less but offered more flexibility. Money would be tight, tighter than it had ever been, but Marcus had lived poor before and survived. He would figure out how to make it work, how to stretch every dollar and make every meal count. He had to, because giving up wasn't an option anymore. Maria Santos arrived that afternoon as promised, a compact woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. She spoke to Sophia in rapid, fluent Spanish, and Marcus watched the girl's face transform as she heard her native language spoken with kindness instead of cruelty. For the first time since he'd found her, Sophia smiled, just a small upturn of her lips. But it was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. Maria explained the legal situation in terms that Marcus could understand. Sophia was undocumented, which made everything more complicated. But she was also a victim of human trafficking, which opened doors that might otherwise be closed. There were special visas for trafficking victims, ways to secure legal status that would allow her to stay in the country safely. The process would be long and difficult, requiring extensive documentation and multiple court appearances. But it was possible. More immediately, Sophia needed a place to live while her case worked its way through the system. Foster care was an option, but finding a placement for an undocumented child with severe trauma was challenging. Many foster families weren't equipped to handle the complex needs of trafficking victims, and the constant moving between homes could re-traumatize a child who desperately needed stability. Marcus found himself speaking before he had consciously made the decision, the words coming from some deep place of certainty he hadn't known existed. He wanted to keep Sophia with him, he said. He wanted to apply to become her foster parent and eventually, if she was willing, to adopt her. He understood. It wouldn't be easy, that he would need training and home studies and background checks. He knew his financial situation wasn't ideal, that his small apartment and modest income weren't what social workers typically looked for in prospective parents. But he also knew that Sophia needed someone who would fight for her, someone who saw her as more than just another case file. She needed someone who understood what it meant to struggle, who wouldn't give up when things got difficult. Most of all, she needed someone who already loved her, even though they'd known each other for less than 24 hours. Maria studied Marcus carefully, taking his measure with the practiced eye of someone who had seen every kind of person who claimed to want to help children. She asked hard questions about his motivations, his expectations, his understanding of what he was committing to. She wanted to know about his support system, his parenting experience, his ability to handle a child with complex trauma. Marcus answered as honestly as he could, admitting his fears and limitations while standing firm on his determination to give Sophia the home she deserved. He talked about Jake, about the lessons he'd learned raising a son through his own crisis. He talked about his mother, about the network of friends and neighbors who had helped him when he needed it most. He talked about love, about how it wasn't always enough, but it was always necessary. By the time Maria left, the sun was setting and Sophia had fallen asleep on the couch, still clutching her new bear. Marcus covered her with a blanket and sat in his chair, staring out at the city lights and trying to process everything that had changed in the span of a single day. Yesterday morning, he had been a struggling single father with barely enough energy to keep his own life together. Now he was potentially the guardian of a severely traumatized child who would need years of healing and support. The rational part of his mind whispered that he was in over his head, that he couldn't possibly provide everything Sophia needed, that he was setting them both up for failure. But the larger part of him, the part that had always known the difference between right and wrong, told him he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Marcus called his mother again to update her on the day's events. Helen listened without judgment, asking practical questions about next steps and offering to help however she could. She would research therapists who specialized in childhood trauma, she said. She would look into support groups for foster parents and adoptive families. She would start making room in her house for another grandchild, because that's what Sophia would be if Marcus went through with this crazy, wonderful plan. Jake called just before bedtime, chattering excitedly about his day with Grandma and asking when he could come home. Marcus explained, as simply as possible, that there was a little girl who needed their help, someone who had been hurt and was scared and needed a safe place to stay. Jake, with the easy acceptance of childhood, immediately wanted to know if she would be his sister and whether she liked basketball, and if she could help him build the Lego spaceship he'd been working on. After the call ended, Marcus sat in the quiet apartment listening to Sophia breathe. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more phone calls and appointments and paperwork. There would be home studies and interviews, therapy sessions and legal hearings. There would be setbacks and difficulties, moments when he questioned his ability to handle everything that lay ahead. But tonight, Sophia was safe and warm and fed. Tonight, she was sleeping peacefully in a place where no one would hurt her, where she could rest without fear. Tonight, Marcus was keeping watch over a child who had found her way to him through the darkest of circumstances, and somehow that felt like the most important job he'd ever had. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain and challenging, but also full of possibility. Marcus Thompson, who had never thought of himself as anyone special, was about to become the father of 2 children instead of 1. He was about to learn that love could grow to accommodate any need, that families could be built from the most unlikely circumstances, that sometimes the best things in life came disguised as the hardest. As he finally allowed himself to sleep, Marcus dreamed of a day when Sophia would smile without fear, when she would run and play and argue about homework like any normal child. He dreamed of teaching her to ride a bike and helping her with school projects, of watching her grow up strong and confident and free. He dreamed of the family they would become, different than what he had planned, but perfect in its own way. And in her sleep, Sophia dreamed too, for the first time in months, allowing herself to imagine a future that held more than just survival. She dreamed of the kind man who had found her in the rain, of the warm apartment that felt like safety, of the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found her way home. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus first brought Sophia home, and the apartment had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. Children's drawings now covered the refrigerator in layers, some bearing Jake's bold crayon strokes depicting spaceships and dinosaurs, others showing Sophia's more delicate pencil, sketches of flowers and birds. A second toothbrush sat in the bathroom cup, pink with sparkles, that Sophia had chosen herself during their first shopping trip together. The couch had been rearranged to accommodate a small bed area where Sophia slept, surrounded by the growing collection of books and stuffed animals that Marcus seemed unable to stop buying for her. The legal machinery had begun its slow grind forward. Marcus had submitted his application to become Sophia's emergency foster parent, a process that involved more paperwork than he had filled out in his entire adult life combined. Social workers had visited twice, inspecting the apartment with clipboards and measuring tape, asking questions about his income, his parenting philosophy, his long-term plans. They were kind but thorough, and Marcus understood they were protecting Sophia even as their scrutiny made him nervous. Dr. Jennifer Walsh had become a regular presence in their lives, a child psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery and spoke both English and Spanish with equal fluency. Sophia met with her twice a week in an office decorated with soft colors and comfortable chairs, slowly learning to process the horrors she had experienced. The sessions were difficult, often leaving Sophia drained and fragile, but Dr. Walsh assured Marcus that this was normal, even necessary. Healing required revisiting wounds before they could properly close. Jake had adjusted to having Sophia in their lives with the remarkable adaptability of childhood. Though not without challenges, he was thrilled to finally have the sibling he had longed for, but he also struggled with sharing his father's attention and space. There had been tears and tantrums, moments when Jake accused Marcus of loving Sophia more because she needed more help. Marcus had spent many late nights holding his son and explaining that love wasn't a finite resource, that caring for Sophia didn't mean there was less love available for Jake. The breakthrough had come during their second week together, when Sophia had woken screaming from a nightmare about being locked in a dark room. Jake, roused by her cries, had climbed down from the top bunk and wordlessly handed her his favorite stuffed dinosaur, the one he had slept with every night since he was 3 years old. Sophia had clutched the toy against her chest, her sobs gradually subsiding, and Jake had curled up on the floor beside the couch to keep her company until morning. From that moment forward, they had been allies rather than competitors for Marcus's attention. The financial strain was becoming impossible to ignore. Marcus's single remaining job barely covered rent and basic expenses, let alone the additional costs of supporting Sophia. There were medical bills from her ongoing treatment, therapy sessions that insurance didn't fully cover, the endless small expenses of caring for a child who had arrived with nothing. Marcus had sold his few valuable possessions, pawned his father's watch, and was now 3 weeks behind on the electric bill. He lay awake at night calculating and recalculating their budget, trying to figure out how to make impossible numbers add up. His mother had helped as much as she could, bringing groceries and paying for Sophia's school supplies when she started attending the local elementary school. Helen had also connected Marcus with Father Miguel Rodriguez at St. Catherine's Church, who had quietly arranged for anonymous donations to cover some of their expenses. The congregation had rallied around Sophia's story, though Marcus was careful to keep the details vague to protect her privacy. Sometimes kindness came from unexpected places, and Marcus was learning to accept help with gratitude rather than pride. Sophia's first day of school had been a milestone fraught with anxiety for everyone involved. She had never attended formal classes before, her education consisting of whatever her grandmother had been able to teach her during brief visits to their village. The prospect of being surrounded by strangers, of having to speak English for hours at a time, of being expected to behave like a normal child when she felt anything but normal, had sent Sophia into a panic attack that lasted most of the previous evening. Marcus had arranged a meeting with Mrs. Patricia Coleman, Sophia's 5th grade teacher, to explain the situation as diplomatically as possible. Mrs. Coleman was a veteran educator in her 50s who had worked with refugee and immigrant children before, and she understood the importance of patience and gentle encouragement. She had created a safe space in her classroom where Sophia could retreat if she felt overwhelmed, and she had briefed the other students on being welcoming without being invasive. The first few days had been rough. Sophia had hidden in the bathroom. During lunch, too anxious to eat around other children, she had struggled with the English language instruction, understanding more than she could express, and becoming frustrated when she couldn't find the words to answer questions. But gradually, with Mrs. Coleman's support and the natural inclusivity of children, Sophia had begun to find her place. She discovered she had a gift for mathematics that transcended language barriers, and her artistic abilities had quickly made her popular during art class. The real test had come when a classmate named Emma Martinez, whose family had immigrated from Mexico, had approached Sophia during recess speaking rapid Spanish. For the first time since starting school, Sophia had smiled genuinely, launching into an animated conversation that Marcus later learned had covered everything from their favorite colors to their shared love of drawing. Emma had become Sophia's first real friend, a bridge between her old life and her new one. Marcus had started working odd jobs on weekends while Jake and Sophia were with his mother, anything he could find that paid cash and didn't require a long-term commitment. He painted houses, moved furniture, cleaned offices, whatever was available. The work was sporadic and exhausting, but it kept them afloat financially while he figured out a more sustainable plan. His body ached constantly from the physical labor, and he had lost weight he couldn't afford to lose, but seeing Sophia slowly come alive made every sacrifice worthwhile. The home study process had intensified, with social workers conducting surprise visits and lengthy interviews. They spoke with Jake about how he felt about Sophia joining their family, with Sophia about whether she felt safe with Marcus, with neighbors about the kind of father Marcus was. They reviewed his financial records, his employment history, his parenting skills. Every aspect of his life was examined and evaluated, and Marcus felt like he was perpetually on trial for a crime he hadn't committed. The most difficult moment had come when a social worker had questioned whether Marcus was truly equipped to handle Sophia's complex needs. His apartment was small, his income insufficient, his support system limited. Wouldn't Sophia be better served in a specialized foster home with parents who had more resources and experience with traumatized children? The suggestion had hit Marcus like a physical blow, forcing him to confront his own insecurities about his ability to provide everything Sophia needed. But that same evening, Sophia had approached him with a school assignment that required her to write about her family. She had written in careful block letters about living with Marcus and Jake, about feeling safe for the first time in months, about having a papa who made her breakfast every morning and helped her with homework. She had drawn a picture of the three of them standing in front of their apartment building, holding hands under a rainbow. When she had shyly shown him her work, Marcus had felt his doubts dissolve. Whatever he lacked in resources, he made up for in love and determination. Dr. Walsh had become an invaluable ally in the custody process, providing expert testimony about Sophia's progress and her attachment to Marcus and Jake. The psychologist had documented Sophia's improvement in concrete terms, noting her decreased anxiety, improved sleep patterns, and growing willingness to trust. She had also observed Sophia's interactions with Marcus, noting the genuine affection and sense of security that had developed between them. Her professional opinion carried significant weight with the court system. The legal proceedings had revealed more about Sophia's case than Marcus had initially known. The apartment where he had delivered pizza that fateful night had been raided by federal agents 2 days after Sophia's escape, resulting in the arrest of 6 individuals involved in the trafficking operation. Sophia's testimony would be crucial to their prosecution, but she wouldn't be required to testify until she was emotionally ready, possibly years in the future. The knowledge that her abusers were in custody had provided Sophia with some measure of relief, though she still struggled with nightmares and anxiety attacks. Immigration attorney Rebecca Chen had taken Sophia's case pro bono, moved by her story and determined to secure her legal status. The T-Visa application for trafficking victims was complex and required extensive documentation, but Rebecca was confident they had a strong case. Sophia's cooperation with law enforcement, combined with evidence of the abuse she had suffered, met all the criteria for the special immigration relief. The process would take time, but Rebecca assured them that Sophia would be able to remain in the country legally while her application was pending. The transformation in Sophia's demeanor had been gradual but unmistakable. The terrified child who had hidden behind a dumpster was slowly being replaced by a little girl who laughed at Jake's silly jokes and proudly displayed her artwork on the refrigerator. She still startled at sudden noises and had difficulty sleeping. Alone, but she was beginning to trust that good things could last, that people could be counted on to keep their promises. Marcus had enrolled in parenting classes specifically designed for foster and adoptive parents, learning about trauma responses and attachment disorders. The classes met twice a week in the basement of a community center, bringing together an unlikely group of people united by their desire to provide homes for children who needed them. Marcus listened to stories from other parents who had navigated similar challenges, absorbing their hard-won wisdom about patience and consistency and the long, slow process of building trust with damaged children. One of the most valuable lessons he had learned was about the importance of maintaining Sophia's connection to her cultural heritage. He had started taking Spanish lessons himself, struggling through basic vocabulary and grammar, while Sophia giggled at his pronunciation. They cooked traditional Guatemalan dishes together on weekends, following recipes that Sophia remembered her grandmother making. Marcus had found a Spanish-language church where Sophia could hear her native language and connect with others who shared her background. The financial pressure had reached a breaking point when Marcus received an eviction notice for unpaid rent. 3 months behind on payments, facing the prospect of homelessness with 2 children depending on him, he had swallowed his pride and applied for emergency assistance from the county. The process was humiliating, requiring him to document every aspect of his financial distress, but it bought them time to figure out a more permanent solution. Helen had offered to let them all move in with her temporarily, but her small house was already crowded with her own belongings and would barely accommodate the 3 of them. Marcus was reluctant to disrupt Sophia's routine when she was finally beginning to feel settled, and Jake was adamant about not wanting to leave their apartment. They had made too many memories there, had built too much of their new family identity in that small space to abandon it without a fight. The solution had come from an unexpected source. Mrs. Coleman had mentioned Marcus's situation to another teacher, who had mentioned it to her husband, who happened to own a small construction company that needed reliable help. Tom Bradley had called Marcus on a Thursday evening, offering him a full-time position that would pay significantly more than his previous jobs combined. The work would be physically demanding and would require him to travel to job sites around the city, but it came with health insurance and a regular schedule that would allow him to be home with the children in the evenings. Marcus had started the new job with a mixture of relief and trepidation. Construction work was harder on his body than warehouse labor or pizza delivery, but it paid enough to cover their expenses and even begin rebuilding their emergency fund. Tom Bradley had turned out to be a fair boss who understood that Marcus had family responsibilities and needed flexibility for court dates and therapy appointments. The other workers had welcomed Marcus into their tight-knit crew, sharing their lunch and their stories and treating him like family. Sophia's progress in school had accelerated dramatically once she began to feel more secure at home. Her English improved daily through immersion and determination, and her teachers marveled at her quick grasp of complex concepts. She had a natural aptitude for science that reminded Marcus of his own childhood curiosity about how things worked. When she had excitedly explained to him how plants made their own food through photosynthesis, her face glowing with the joy of learning, Marcus had felt a pride that surpassed anything he had experienced with his own achievements. The relationship between Sophia and Jake had evolved into something beautiful and complex. They bickered like real siblings, competing for bathroom time and arguing over television programs, but they also protected each other fiercely. When a boy at school had made fun of Sophia's accent, Jake had confronted him with 7-year-old indignation and earned himself a trip to the principal's office for fighting. When Jake had been upset about striking out during a baseball game, Sophia had spent an hour teaching him to draw cartoon characters to cheer him up. Dr. Walsh had begun spacing out Sophia's therapy sessions, reducing them from twice weekly to once a week as her patient showed signs of genuine healing. The nightmares had become less frequent, the panic attacks more manageable. Sophia was learning coping strategies for dealing with anxiety and triggers, developing the emotional tools she would need to navigate the world as a survivor of trauma. The process would continue for years, possibly for the rest of her life, but she was building a foundation of resilience that would serve her well. The court hearing for permanent foster placement had been scheduled for a Friday morning in November, 6 months after Sophia had first entered their lives. Marcus had taken the day off work and worn his only good suit, a charcoal grey outfit he had bought for job interviews years earlier. Sophia had chosen her favorite dress, a blue one with small flowers that matched her school backpack, and had spent extra time braiding her hair in the intricate pattern her grandmother had taught her. The courthouse was an imposing building with marble floors and high ceilings that echoed with footsteps and whispered conversations. Sophia stayed close to Marcus's side as they navigated the corridors, her small hand gripping his tightly. They were joined by Rebecca Chen, Dr. Walsh, and Maria Santos, a formidable team of advocates who had worked tirelessly to prepare for this moment. The judge was a middle-aged woman named Patricia Hendricks, who had a reputation for being tough but fair in child welfare cases. She reviewed the extensive file that had been compiled over the past months, including home study reports, psychological evaluations, character references, and financial documentation. Marcus answered her questions about his motivations, his resources, his understanding of the long-term commitment he was making. Sophia was asked to speak with the judge privately, a conversation that lasted nearly an hour while Marcus waited in the hallway, trying not to imagine everything that could go wrong. When they emerged, Sophia was holding a tissue but looked calm and determined. Judge Hendricks had asked her whether she wanted to stay with Marcus permanently, whether she felt safe and loved in their home, whether she understood that this would make their family legal and official. The judge's decision was delivered in formal legal language that boiled down to a simple truth. Sophia would remain in Marcus's care as his foster daughter, with the goal of moving toward adoption once her immigration status was resolved. The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration as Marcus hugged Sophia and felt tears streaming down his face. After months of uncertainty and bureaucratic limbo, they were finally a family in the eyes of the law. The celebration dinner that evening was a modest affair at their favorite pizza restaurant, the same chain where Marcus had once worked as a delivery driver. Sophia ordered her usual pepperoni and cheese, while Jake insisted on the meat lover's special that was almost too big for him to finish. Marcus watched his children argue over arcade games and felt a contentment he had never experienced before. This was what happiness looked like. Not wealth or success or recognition, but simply being together and knowing they belonged to each other. Back at home that night, Sophia had presented Marcus with a hand-drawn card she had been working on secretly. for weeks. The front showed a stick-figure family of 3, standing in front of a house with "Mi Familia" written in careful letters across the top. Inside, she had written in both Spanish and English that she loved him and Jake and wanted to be their family forever. She had signed it Sophia Thompson, practicing the surname she hoped to carry officially someday soon. As Marcus tucked both children into their respective beds that night, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. 6 months ago, he had been a struggling single father, barely keeping his head above water, working multiple jobs just to survive. Now he was the proud parent of 2 children who filled his life with purpose and joy, even as they stretched his resources and challenged his patience daily. The future was still uncertain, still fraught with challenges, both financial and emotional, but they would face whatever came together as a family. Sophia fell asleep, clutching her brown bear and Jake's dinosaur, surrounded by the artwork and books and small treasures that marked this space as her own. In the morning, she would wake up in a home where she was wanted and valued, where her dreams and fears mattered to people who had chosen to love her. She would go to school and learn new things and play with friends who accepted her as she was. She would come home to a father who helped with homework and made dinner and listened to her stories about her day. The transformation was complete, though the work of being a family would continue for years to come. Marcus Thompson had rescued a child from unimaginable circumstances, but in the process, she had rescued him too, giving him a purpose that transcended his own struggles and worries. Together with Jake, they had built something beautiful and strong from the ashes of their separate tragedies, proving that love really could conquer the darkest circumstances when people were brave enough to choose each other. The phone call came on a cold February morning while Marcus was getting the children ready for school. Sophia was struggling with her shoelaces, a task she had mastered weeks ago, but sometimes still found difficult when anxiety crept in, and Jake was searching frantically for his science project about volcanoes that was due that day. The normal chaos of a school morning was interrupted by the shrill ring of Marcus's cell phone, displaying a number he didn't recognize but instinctively feared. Rebecca Chen's voice was tense, professional but tinged with urgency. Immigration and Customs Enforcement had contacted her office with disturbing news. Sophia's case had been flagged by federal prosecutors who were building their case against the trafficking ring. New evidence had surfaced that suggested the organization was larger and more sophisticated than initially believed, with connections spanning multiple states and involving dozens of victims. Sophia's testimony was no longer just helpful to their case. It was essential. The implications hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. Sophia would need to testify in federal court, facing the men who had brutalized her, reliving the nightmare she had worked so hard to overcome. The prosecution was offering additional protections and expedited immigration processing in exchange for her cooperation, but they needed an answer soon. Other victims had already agreed to testify, and the trial was scheduled to begin in 6 weeks. Marcus watched Sophia finally master her shoelaces and beam with pride at her accomplishment, completely unaware that her carefully rebuilt world was about to be shaken to its foundations. How could he ask an 11-year-old girl to face monsters in a courtroom, to speak aloud the unspeakable things that had been done to her? But how could he deny justice to other victims who were still trapped in the system that had once held Sophia captive? After dropping the children at school, Marcus called in sick to work and spent the day on the phone with lawyers, victim advocates, and Dr. Walsh. Everyone agreed that the decision ultimately belonged to Sophia, but they also acknowledged that she was a child who couldn't fully comprehend the implications of either choice. If she testified, she would help ensure that dangerous criminals were imprisoned and other children were protected. If she refused, the prosecution's case would be weakened, and there was a chance some of the perpetrators might escape justice. Dr. Walsh was particularly concerned about the potential psychological impact of testimony. Sophia had made remarkable progress in therapy, but she was still fragile, still working through trauma that would take years to fully process. The stress of a trial could trigger setbacks, regression, even a complete breakdown of the trust and security she had worked so hard to build. On the other hand, some survivors found that confronting their abusers in court provided a sense of closure and empowerment that aided in their healing. When Marcus picked up the children from school that afternoon, Sophia immediately sensed something was wrong. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to read the emotions of the adults around her, a survival skill learned during months of captivity when detecting mood changes could mean the difference between safety and pain. She watched Marcus carefully throughout dinner, noting his distraction and the forced quality of his smiles. That evening, after Jake had gone to bed, Marcus sat down with Sophia in the living room where they had shared so many important conversations. He explained the situation as gently as possible, using age-appropriate language while not hiding the seriousness of what was being asked of her. Sophia listened without interrupting, her dark eyes growing wider as she began to understand what testifying would mean. Her first question caught Marcus off guard with its maturity. She wanted to know if other children would be hurt if she didn't help put the bad men in prison. When Marcus carefully explained that there might be other victims who couldn't escape. Without help, Sophia fell silent for a long time, staring at her hands folded in her lap. Finally, she asked if Marcus and Jake would still love her no matter what she decided. The conversation stretched late into the night, with Sophia asking dozens of questions about courtrooms and lawyers and what would happen to the men who had hurt her. Marcus answered as honestly as he could, drawing on his own limited experience with the legal system and the research he had frantically conducted throughout the day. Dr. Walsh had provided talking points about the support systems that would be in place, the ways they could minimize Sophia's stress and trauma during the process. Sophia's biggest fear wasn't facing her abusers. It was that testifying would somehow make her dirty again, would remind everyone of the terrible things that had been done to her and make them see her differently. She had worked so hard to become just a normal girl, to be Jake's sister and Marcus's daughter rather than a victim with a tragic story. The thought of having her trauma exposed in a public courtroom filled her with shame that she couldn't articulate, but that Marcus recognized from his own experiences with feeling powerless. 3 days passed before Sophia gave her answer. She had spent hours talking to Dr. Walsh, who helped her process her fears and understand her options without pressure. She had prayed to the Virgin Mary, seeking guidance from the faith that had sustained her through her darkest moments. She had even confided in Jake, who listened with 8-year-old seriousness and told her he would beat up anyone who tried to hurt her ever again. On Thursday evening, Sophia approached Marcus while he was washing dishes and announced that she would testify. She wanted to help other children who were still trapped, she said. She wanted the bad men to go to prison so they couldn't hurt anyone else. She was scared, but she was also brave, and she trusted Marcus and Dr. Walsh and Rebecca to keep her safe through the process. The preparation for Sophia's testimony began immediately. Rebecca arranged for her to meet with federal prosecutors who specialized in trafficking cases, experienced attorneys who understood how to work with child witnesses. They visited the courthouse where the trial would be held, allowing Sophia to see the courtroom when it was empty and less intimidating. Dr. Walsh intensified their therapy sessions, helping Sophia develop coping strategies for the stress and anxiety that would inevitably accompany the trial. Marcus reduced his work hours to be available for the constant stream of meetings and preparations. Tom Bradley was understanding about the situation, even offering to testify as a character witness if needed. The construction crew had become like family over the past months, and they rallied around Marcus with offers of support and encouragement. The media attention was the aspect of the trial that Marcus hadn't anticipated. Human trafficking cases involving children generated significant public interest, and several news outlets requested interviews with Sophia and her family. Rebecca firmly declined all media requests, citing Sophia's age and the ongoing legal proceedings. But reporters still lingered outside their apartment building and the courthouse, hoping for photos or comments. Sophia's school became a sanctuary. During this period, one of the few places where she could maintain some normalcy. Mrs. Coleman and the principal worked together to ensure that Sophia's privacy was protected, that she could attend classes and participate in activities without being singled out or questioned about the trial. Her friendship with Emma Martinez deepened as Emma instinctively understood that Sophia needed extra support, even without knowing the specific details of what she was facing. Jake struggled with his sister's increased anxiety and the disruption to their routine. He didn't fully understand why Sophia was having more nightmares again, why she sometimes cried for no apparent reason, why their father seemed more worried than usual. Marcus tried to maintain Jake's normal activities and schedule while managing Sophia's needs, but it was a difficult balance that left everyone feeling stretched thin. The first day of testimony arrived with unseasonable warmth for March, as if nature was trying to provide some small comfort for the ordeal ahead. Sophia had chosen her favorite dress, the blue one with flowers, and had braided her hair in the style her grandmother had taught her. She carried a small cross that Father Miguel had blessed, and Jake's dinosaur was tucked discreetly in her backpack for emotional support. The courthouse was surrounded by media vans and protesters, some supporting the victims and others questioning the prosecution's tactics. Marcus shielded Sophia from the cameras as best he could, but he knew that photos would appear in newspapers and on websites regardless of his efforts. The attention felt violating, turning their private struggle into public entertainment. Inside the courtroom, Sophia was allowed to testify via closed-circuit television, sparing her from having to face her abusers directly. She sat in a small room adjacent to the courtroom, with only Marcus, Rebecca, and a court reporter present. Dr. Walsh waited just outside the door, ready to intervene if Sophia became overwhelmed. The prosecutor was a woman named Catherine Mills, who had built her career on trafficking cases. She spoke to Sophia with gentle firmness, asking questions in a straightforward manner that avoided unnecessarily graphic details, while still establishing the facts necessary for conviction. Sophia answered in a clear voice, sometimes switching to Spanish when emotions overwhelmed her English vocabulary, with an interpreter providing translation for the court record. The defense attorneys were more aggressive, attempting to discredit Sophia's memory and suggesting that her testimony had been coached or influenced by her desire to remain in the United States. Rebecca objected frequently, and the judge sustained most of her objections, but the implications stung nonetheless. Sophia's hands shook as she answered questions about inconsistencies in her story, small details that had become blurred or confused in her traumatized memory. Marcus watched his daughter display a courage that humbled him, speaking truth in the face of attempts to diminish and discredit her experience. When the defense attorney suggested that Sophia might be lying about her age to gain sympathy, Sophia looked directly into the camera and recited her birth date, her parents' names, and details about her village that could be easily verified. Her dignity in the face of attack was remarkable for someone so young. The cross-examination lasted 3 hours, with frequent breaks to allow Sophia to compose herself and consult with Dr. Walsh. By the end, she was exhausted but proud of herself for completing such a difficult task. The prosecutor told her that her testimony was compelling and credible, that she had done an excellent job of helping the jury understand what had happened to her and other victims. The trial continued for 2 more weeks without Sophia's direct involvement, though Marcus attended as many sessions as his work schedule allowed. He watched the defendants, middle-aged men in suits who looked ordinary and unremarkable, trying to reconcile their mundane appearance with the horrors they had inflicted. The victims testified, young women who had aged out of the system or been rescued by law enforcement, their stories forming a pattern of systematic abuse and exploitation. The evidence was overwhelming, including financial records, communications between defendants, and testimony from law enforcement officers who had conducted the raid. The defense strategy seemed to focus on minimizing sentences rather than disputing guilt, arguing that their clients were small players in a larger organization rather than masterminds of the operation. During the trial, Sophia experienced setbacks. In her emotional recovery, nightmares returned with increased frequency, and she became clingy and anxious about separation from Marcus. She worried constantly that the bad men would escape from prison and come looking for her, despite repeated assurances about the security measures in place. Dr. Walsh increased their session frequency again, helping Sophia process the trauma of reliving her experiences through testimony. Jake became protective of Sophia in ways that were both touching and concerning. He appointed himself her bodyguard, insisting on walking her to and from the school bus and refusing to play outside unless she was with him. When a classmate innocently asked Sophia about why she had missed so much school recently, Jake stepped in with a fierce warning that made the other child back away quickly. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon in late March. Marcus had taken both children to his mother's house for the day, wanting to shield them from the media circus that would inevitably surround the announcement. Rebecca called him with the news: guilty verdicts on all major charges for all defendants. The sentences would be substantial, likely decades in federal prison for the ringleaders. Sophia's reaction to the news was complex and unexpected. Rather than relief or satisfaction, she seemed almost anticlimactic about the outcome. The men who had hurt her were going to prison, but that didn't undo the damage they had caused or restore what had been taken from her. Justice was important, but it wasn't healing. That would still require years of work and support and love. The media attention intensified after the verdicts, with reporters seeking interviews about Sophia's role in securing convictions. Rebecca continued to shield the family from most requests, but she did arrange for one carefully controlled interview with a journalist who specialized in child welfare issues. Sophia wanted to speak publicly, she said, to encourage other victims to come forward and seek help. The interview was conducted at Dr. Walsh's office, with strict ground rules about what questions could be asked and what details could be published. Sophia spoke about the importance of telling trusted adults when something was wrong, about the difference between keeping appropriate secrets and staying silent about abuse. She didn't discuss graphic details of her experience, but she emphasized that help was available for children in dangerous situations. The article was published in several national newspapers and sparked conversations about human trafficking awareness and prevention. Sophia received letters from other survivors thanking her for her bravery, and from children who had been inspired to seek help for their own dangerous situations. The positive response helped Sophia feel that her suffering had served a purpose, that something good had come from something terrible. As spring turned toward summer, the intensity of the trial aftermath began to fade. Sophia's immigration case was expedited as promised, and she received her T visa, approving her legal status in the United States. The document was just a piece of paper, but it represented security and belonging in ways that went far beyond its legal significance. Sophia was no longer living in fear of deportation or uncertainty about her future. The family settled into new routines that accommodated Sophia's ongoing therapy needs while allowing for normal childhood activities. Marcus had been promoted to crew supervisor at the construction company, a position that came with increased responsibility, but also better pay and more predictable hours. The financial pressure that had dominated their early months together had eased considerably. Sophia excelled in her final months of 5th grade, her confidence growing along with her English proficiency. She had been selected for the school's accelerated math program and had won a district-wide art contest with a drawing of a family of trees with intertwined roots. The metaphor wasn't lost on anyone who saw it. Like those trees, the Thompson family had grown stronger by growing together. The adoption paperwork was filed on Sophia's 12th birthday, a deliberate choice that would forever link the celebration of her life with the legal recognition of her place in their family. The process would take several more months to complete, but filing the petition felt like crossing a threshold into permanence and security that even the foster placement hadn't provided. Dr. Walsh began spacing out Sophia's therapy sessions to once monthly, noting her remarkable progress in processing trauma and building healthy coping mechanisms. The nightmares had become infrequent, occurring mainly during times of stress or change. Sophia had learned to manage her anxiety through breathing exercises, art therapy, and talking through her feelings rather than withdrawing into herself. The criminal case had one final chapter when the lead defendant filed an appeal, arguing that his conviction should be overturned due to procedural errors during the trial. The prospect of Sophia having to testify again sent her into a temporary spiral of anxiety, but Rebecca assured them that appellate courts rarely ordered new trials in cases with such overwhelming evidence. The appeal was ultimately denied without requiring additional testimony from any victims. Summer brought new challenges and opportunities. Sophia attended her first sleepover at Emma's house, a milestone that required careful preparation and multiple backup plans in case she became overwhelmed. The night went smoothly, with Sophia calling Marcus only once to say goodnight and confirm that he would pick her up the next morning, as promised. Such normal childhood experiences were treasures that the family never took for granted. Jake started playing Little League Baseball with Sophia as his most enthusiastic supporter in the stands. She kept detailed statistics of his performance and drew pictures of his best plays to hang on the refrigerator. Their sibling bond had evolved into something unbreakable, forged through shared adversity and sealed by mutual protection and love. The anniversary of Sophia's rescue passed quietly, marked only by a family dinner at their favorite restaurant and a private moment of gratitude for how far they had all come. Sophia no longer measured her life by the trauma she had endured, but by the love she had found and the future she was building. The scared child hiding behind a dumpster had been transformed into a confident young girl with dreams and goals and the support system to achieve them. Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point, marveling at how a single decision to help a stranger had fundamentally altered the trajectory of his life. He had thought he was rescuing Sophia, but in many ways, she had rescued him as well, giving him a purpose beyond mere survival and showing him that love really could triumph over the darkest circumstances. The legal system had done its job, putting dangerous criminals behind bars and providing justice for their victims. But the real victory was quieter and more personal. A family created from tragedy, love growing from ashes, and a little girl who had learned that she deserved safety and happiness, and people who would fight for her no matter what obstacles arose. As autumn approached and Sophia prepared to start 7th grade, the future stretched ahead of them bright with possibility. There would still be challenges, still moments of doubt and setbacks and difficulties that tested their resilience. But they would face whatever came together, bound by choice rather than circumstance, united by love that had been tested and proven unbreakable. 2 years had passed since the trial, and the Thompson household hummed with the comfortable rhythms of an established family. Sophia, now 14 and towering over Jake despite being only 2 years older, stood in front of the bathroom mirror, applying lip gloss with the concentrated precision of a teenager preparing for her first high school dance. Her transformation from the terrified child Marcus had found behind a dumpster seemed complete, though he knew better than to assume healing was ever truly finished. The adoption had been finalized 8 months earlier in a ceremony that was both anticlimactic and profoundly meaningful. Judge Hendricks, the same woman who had approved Sophia's foster placement, had smiled warmly as she declared Sophia legally and permanently a Thompson. The paperwork that followed was routine, but the moment when Sophia signed her new name for the first time had brought tears to everyone's eyes. Sophia Elena Thompson, written in her careful script, represented not just a legal change, but a transformation of identity from victim to beloved daughter. Marcus watched from the doorway as Sophia practiced her dance moves, preparing for the winter formal at Roosevelt High School, where she was now a freshman. Her date was a quiet boy named David Chen, Rebecca's nephew, who had somehow worked up the courage to ask the beautiful, confident girl who tutored struggling students in mathematics and spoke 3 languages fluently. Sophia had accepted with the kind of thoughtful consideration she brought to all her decisions, weighing David's sincerity against her own readiness for such a milestone. The conversation about dating had been delicate territory for Marcus, who struggled to balance his protective instincts with Sophia's natural development into a young woman. Dr. Walsh, who still saw Sophia occasionally for maintenance sessions, had advised him to trust the foundation of safety and self-worth they had built together. Sophia had learned to recognize and articulate her boundaries, to trust her instincts about people's intentions, to understand the difference between healthy attention and manipulation. Jake, now 10 and fiercely protective of his sister despite their frequent sibling squabbles, had interrogated David with the intensity of a federal prosecutor. Did he play sports? What were his grades? Had he ever been in trouble at school? Did he understand that Sophia was the smartest, bravest person in the world, and that anyone who hurt her would have to answer to the entire Thompson family? David had passed the examination with flying colors, earning Jake's grudging approval and Sophia's amused gratitude. The preparation for the dance had been a family affair, with Helen Thompson taking charge of dress shopping and Marcus learning to tie a corsage while watching YouTube videos. Sophia had chosen a deep blue dress that complemented her dark hair and reminded Marcus of the stormy night when she had first entered their lives. The symbolism wasn't lost on any of them. She had chosen to wear the color of transformation, of the night that had changed everything. Marcus's own life had stabilized in ways he had never thought possible during those early, desperate years. The construction company had grown, and Tom Bradley had made Marcus a partner after recognizing his talent for managing both projects and people. The financial security that came with part ownership had allowed them to move to a larger apartment, in a better neighborhood, close enough to Sophia's high school that she could walk with friends rather than taking the bus. The new apartment had 3 bedrooms, giving both children their own space while maintaining the close-knit feeling that had sustained them through their most difficult times. Sophia's room was a reflection of her evolving interests. Mathematical equations and artistic sketches adorning the walls, books in both English and Spanish filling the shelves, and photographs of family moments marking her journey from scared refugee to confident teenager. Jake's room remained a monument to his love of sports and science fiction, but now included a prominent display of the awards Sophia had earned for academic excellence and community service. Sophia's academic achievements had opened doors that Marcus had barely dared to imagine. She was enrolled in advanced placement courses, maintained a perfect grade point average, and had already been contacted by college recruiters despite being only a freshman. Her guidance counselor spoke in terms of full scholarships to prestigious universities, opportunities that seemed almost mythical to Marcus, who had never finished college himself. Sophia accepted the praise and attention with characteristic humility, understanding that her education was both a gift and a responsibility. The community service that had started as a requirement for Sophia's immigration case had evolved into a passion that defined much of her free time. She volunteered at the same clinic where Dr. Reeves had first examined her, helping translate for Spanish-speaking patients and assisting with children who were frightened of medical procedures. Her gentle manner and ability to communicate across language barriers made her invaluable to the staff, who had watched her grow from patient to volunteer to almost a colleague. Sophia also worked with an organization that supported trafficking survivors, sharing her story when appropriate and helping newly rescued children understand that healing was possible. These interactions were carefully supervised by trained counselors, and Sophia never worked with children whose situations too closely mirrored her own past. But her presence, her obvious health and happiness, provided hope to kids who had given up believing that normal life was possible for people like them. The evening of the dance arrived with the kind of crisp December air that made everything feel festive and full of possibility. David arrived promptly at 7, dressed in a rented tuxedo and carrying a corsage that matched Sophia's dress perfectly. Marcus had to suppress a smile at the young man's obvious nervousness, remembering his own awkward teenage attempts at gallantry. Helen had prepared an elaborate dinner for the occasion, treating the event with the seriousness it deserved while keeping the atmosphere light and celebratory. Jake documented every moment with the enthusiasm of a professional photographer, snapping pictures of Sophia pinning David's boutonniere and insisting on multiple shots of the couple by the Christmas tree. His pride in his sister was evident in every gesture, and Sophia tolerated his attention with the patient affection of someone who understood how much these moments meant to all of them. As the young couple prepared to leave for the dance, Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with watching his children take steps toward independence. Sophia must have sensed his emotion because she broke away from David's arm to give Marcus a fierce hug, whispering in his ear that she loved him and would text updates throughout the evening. The gesture was so perfectly Sophia, managing to be both mature and reassuring, that Marcus felt his eyes water despite his best efforts to remain composed. The dance was held in the school gymnasium, transformed for the evening with twinkling lights and elegant decorations created by the student council. Sophia and David joined their friends on the dance floor, and Marcus tried not to think about how grown up she looked, moving with confidence and grace among her peers. This was what normal looked like, what they had worked so hard to achieve. A teenage girl attending her first formal dance, worried about nothing more serious than whether her shoes would be comfortable for dancing. While Sophia enjoyed her evening out, Marcus and Jake settled in for their own tradition of pizza and board games, a routine they had established for occasions when Sophia had social commitments. Jake was old enough now to understand some of the history that had brought their family together, and he often asked thoughtful questions about Sophia's early days with them. Marcus answered as honestly as he could while protecting Sophia's privacy, helping Jake understand that their family was built on choice and love rather than just biological connection. The evening passed peacefully, with Sophia texting periodic updates as promised, and Jake eventually falling asleep on the couch while watching a movie. Marcus covered his son with a blanket and settled in to wait for Sophia's return, the kind of normal parental anxiety that felt like a luxury after years of more serious worries. When David's father brought Sophia home at the agreed-upon time, she was glowing with happiness and bursting with stories about the evening's highlights. The success of the dance marked another milestone in Sophia's journey toward a completely normal adolescence. She had navigated the social complexities of high school with the same intelligence and grace she brought to academic challenges, forming friendships based on shared interests rather than sympathy for her past experiences. Most of her friends knew nothing about her background beyond the fact that she was adopted, and Sophia preferred it that way, wanting to be known for who she was becoming rather than what she had survived. Spring brought new challenges and opportunities as Sophia began exploring potential career paths and summer programs. Her gift for mathematics had evolved into a particular interest in engineering, inspired by watching Marcus's construction projects and understanding how mathematical principles translated into physical structures. She had been accepted into a competitive summer program at the State University, where high school students could take college-level courses and conduct research with professors. The program would require Sophia to live on campus for 6 weeks, her first extended separation from the family since she had arrived as a frightened 11-year-old. The prospect triggered anxiety for all of them, but Dr. Walsh encouraged them to view it as a positive sign of Sophia's readiness for increased independence. They developed a comprehensive communication plan with daily video calls and weekend visits to ease the transition for everyone involved. Marcus's pride in Sophia's achievements was tempered by the natural sadness of watching his children grow up and begin to separate from the family unit that had sustained them through their most difficult years. Jake, now old enough to understand that Sophia would eventually leave for college, had become more clingy and possessive of their time together. The family dynamics were shifting as the children matured, requiring constant recalibration of relationships and expectations. Sophia's relationship with David had developed into a steady, healthy partnership that Marcus observed with the careful attention of a father who understood the importance of his daughter's first serious relationship. David was respectful, intelligent, and genuinely seemed to care about Sophia's well-being rather than just her beauty or academic success. His family had welcomed Sophia warmly, treating her as just another teenager rather than someone with a traumatic past that required special handling. The summer program proved to be a transformative experience for Sophia, confirming her interest in engineering while also building her confidence in her ability to succeed in challenging academic environments. She excelled in her coursework, impressed her professors with her work ethic and creativity, and formed friendships with other academically gifted students from around the country. The weekly visits home became opportunities for her to share her excitement about her discoveries and future possibilities. When Sophia returned from the summer program, she seemed older and more self-assured, having proven to herself that she could thrive independently while maintaining her connection to family. The experience had also clarified her goals for the future. She wanted to pursue a degree in civil engineering with a focus on sustainable infrastructure, combining her mathematical abilities with her desire to help communities build better futures for themselves. The beginning of Sophia's sophomore year brought college recruiters to their doorstep, representatives from prestigious universities who had heard about the exceptional student from Roosevelt High School. Sophia handled the attention with characteristic composure, asking intelligent questions about academic programs, while making it clear that her decision would be based on educational opportunities rather than financial incentives. The full scholarships being offered seemed almost surreal to Marcus, who remembered the days when buying school supplies had been a financial strain. Jake's development continued along a different but equally rewarding trajectory. He had inherited his father's mechanical aptitude and enjoyed helping with construction projects during weekends and school breaks. His academic performance was solid, if not spectacular, and he had developed a passion for environmental science that complemented Sophia's engineering interests. The siblings often worked together on science fair projects, combining Jake's understanding of ecological systems with Sophia's mathematical modeling abilities. The family traditions they had established over the years provided stability and continuity as the children grew and changed. Sunday dinners with Helen remained sacred time, opportunities for multiple generations to connect and share their experiences. Holiday celebrations blended Guatemalan traditions that honored Sophia's heritage with American customs that reflected their current life. Birthday parties had evolved from simple celebrations into elaborate affairs that reflected each child's growing social circle and changing interests. Sophia's quinceañera, celebrating her 15th birthday, had been a particularly meaningful event that bridged her past and present in ways that honored both her cultural heritage and her current family structure. Father Miguel had conducted a special mass recognizing Sophia's transition to womanhood, and the celebration that followed included extended family, friends from school, and members of the immigrant community who had supported the family over the years. Sophia had worn a traditional dress in the same blue that had marked so many important moments in her journey, dancing first with Marcus and then with Jake in a ceremony that formally acknowledged their bonds as family. As Sophia's junior year began, the focus shifted increasingly toward college preparation and the inevitable transition that loomed on the horizon. She had narrowed her college choices to 3 universities, each offering full scholarships and excellent engineering programs. The decision would ultimately come down to which school offered the best combination of academic opportunities and proximity to family, as Sophia was reluctant to move too far from the support system that had sustained her growth. Marcus found himself grappling with emotions he hadn't expected as Sophia's departure for college grew closer. He was immensely proud of her achievements and excited about her future, but he also felt a deep sadness about the end of their daily family life together. The little girl, who had once needed his protection and guidance, had become a confident young woman, capable of making her own decisions and pursuing her own dreams. The success of their family experiment was evident in Sophia's readiness to leave them, but that success felt bittersweet to the father who had devoted himself to creating a safe space for her to grow. Jake's reaction to Sophia's impending departure was more complex, mixing pride in his sister's accomplishments with anxiety about losing his closest ally and confidant. He had never known life without Sophia, and couldn't imagine their family dynamic without her daily presence. Conversations about college became opportunities for Jake to express his fears about being left behind and his concerns about whether their family would remain strong despite physical separation. Sophia's response to Jake's concerns demonstrated the emotional maturity that had developed alongside her academic achievements. She assured him that distance wouldn't change their relationship, that she would always be his sister regardless of geography. She helped him understand that growing up didn't mean growing apart, that their bond had been forged through shared experiences that couldn't be broken by mere physical separation. Her patience with his fears reflected the empathy that had developed from her own experience of loss and displacement. The college decision was announced on a spring evening during one of their traditional family dinners. Sophia had chosen the State University, the same institution where she had attended the summer program, because it offered the best combination of academic excellence and reasonable distance from home. She could pursue her engineering degree while remaining close enough for regular visits and family emergencies. The decision felt like a perfect compromise between independence and connection, adventure and security. Graduation day arrived with the kind of pomp and ceremony that made even routine achievements feel momentous. Sophia was named valedictorian, an honor that surprised no one who knew her work ethic and intelligence. Her graduation speech focused on the theme of second chances and the importance of community support in helping individuals reach their potential. She spoke without mentioning her specific background, but everyone who knew their story understood the deeper meaning behind her words about resilience and transformation. Marcus sat in the audience watching his daughter address her graduating class and felt a pride so intense it was almost overwhelming. The confident young woman at the podium bore little resemblance to the terrified child he had found in an alley 5 years earlier, but the core strength that had enabled her survival had remained constant throughout her transformation. Sophia had not just overcome her past, she had transformed it into a source of wisdom and motivation that would serve her throughout her life. The summer before college was deliberately kept low-key, a chance for the family to spend time together. Before their daily dynamic changed permanently, they took a camping trip to the mountains, Sophia's first experience with wilderness recreation, and marveled at her delight in activities that most teenagers took for granted. They visited colleges and museums, attended baseball games and concerts, and generally enjoyed the kind of normal family experiences that had once seemed impossible. As the time for Sophia's departure approached, the emotional preparation became as important as the practical arrangements. Dr. Walsh met with the entire family to discuss strategies for maintaining connection across distance and managing the natural anxiety that accompanied major life transitions. She reminded them that their bond had been tested by far greater challenges than college separation and had emerged stronger each time. The day Sophia left for college was both celebration and goodbye, marking the successful completion of one phase of their journey and the beginning of another. Marcus and Jake helped her move into her dormitory room, meeting her roommate and seeing the environment where she would spend the next phase of her life. The campus was beautiful and welcoming, filled with students from diverse backgrounds who shared Sophia's academic ambition and intellectual curiosity. The goodbye was surprisingly difficult for everyone, even though they had spent months preparing for the moment. Sophia hugged Marcus and Jake fiercely, promising to call frequently and visit often. Jake presented her with a carefully wrapped package containing the stuffed dinosaur that had comforted her during her first night in their apartment, explaining that she should keep it until she came home for Thanksgiving. The gesture reduced everyone to tears and perfectly captured the mixture of love and loss that defined the moment. Driving home from the university, Marcus and Jake were quiet, each processing the magnitude of the change in their own way. The apartment felt larger and emptier without Sophia's presence, but it also felt complete in a way that reflected the success of their family mission. They had created a safe space for a traumatized child to heal and grow, and she had used that foundation to build a life of purpose and achievement that would take her far beyond their original circumstances. The phone call came that evening, Sophia's voice bright with excitement as she described her first day of college life. She had attended orientation sessions, met with her academic advisor, and begun forming friendships with other students in her program. Her happiness was evident in every word, and Marcus understood that this was exactly what success looked like: a young woman confidently embracing her future while maintaining her connection to the family that had made it possible. As the weeks passed, their new routine established itself naturally. Sophia called regularly, sharing stories about her classes and discoveries, while asking about Jake's school activities and Marcus's latest construction projects. Her visits home were frequent enough to maintain their close relationship, while infrequent enough to allow her full immersion in college life. The balance felt healthy and sustainable, proof that love could evolve and adapt to changing circumstances. Sophia's freshman year flew by in a blur of academic achievements and personal growth. She made the dean's list both semesters, joined the Society of Women Engineers, and began working on research projects with faculty members who recognized her exceptional potential. Her confidence continued to grow as she proved to herself that she could compete successfully with students from privileged backgrounds, that her unconventional path to college had actually prepared her well for the challenges she encountered. The summer after her freshman year, Sophia returned home with new maturity and perspective, having experienced life outside the protective embrace of her family for the first time since her rescue. She had learned to navigate independence while maintaining her values and priorities, to form new relationships while honoring existing commitments. Her growth was evident in her increased confidence and her ability to see her own experiences in the broader context of social justice and community responsibility. During that summer, Sophia began working with a non-profit organization that provided educational support to immigrant children, using her engineering skills to develop innovative learning tools and her personal experience to connect with students facing similar challenges. The work was deeply meaningful to her, allowing her to give back to communities like the one that had supported her own recovery and growth. Marcus watched her dedication to service with pride, understanding that her desire to help others was a direct result of the kindness she had received during her own darkest moments. As Sophia prepared to return for her sophomore year, the family had fully adjusted to their new configuration. Jake, now in middle school, had developed his own interests and friendships while maintaining his close relationship with his sister. Marcus had continued to grow his business, using the stability Sophia's success had brought to expand into new areas of construction and community development. Helen remained the family anchor, providing wisdom and support as her grandchildren continued to flourish. The final conversation of the summer took place on the evening before Sophia's return to college, a quiet moment between father and daughter that acknowledged how far they had traveled together. Sophia thanked Marcus for seeing potential in a scared child and giving her the chance to become who she was meant to be. Marcus reminded her that she had saved him as much as he had saved her, that their family had been built through mutual rescue and shared commitment to something larger than individual survival. As Sophia drove away the next morning, heading back to college with confidence and excitement about the year ahead, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The frightened child he had found hiding behind a dumpster had become a confident young woman, pursuing her dreams while maintaining her commitment to helping others. Their family, built from tragedy and sustained by love, had not just survived but thrived, proving that healing was possible and that second chances could lead to extraordinary outcomes. The house was quiet that morning, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with the echoes of laughter and conversations, arguments and celebrations, all the moments that had transformed three separate individuals into an unbreakable family unit. Sophia would continue to grow and achieve, building the life she had been denied as a child, while carrying forward the values and love that had sustained her recovery. And Marcus knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, bound by choice rather than circumstance, united by a love that had been tested by the worst imaginable circumstances and had emerged stronger than ever. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.